Peter, was Forrestal a member of the MJ12 group?
He was. In taking this subject on for the documentary, I made a decision based on 30 years of arguing among ufologists and historians about the reality viability of this ultra top secret, above top secret, so to say, working group that we are to understand that President Truman created in response to trying to get to the bottom of the event. MJ12 broke in, I believe, the spring of 1987. It's quite a legendary story in ufology, whereby Stanton Friedman, a researcher named Jamie Chandray, and a legendary spook, I could go to my bookshelf right now and find it, but a roll of film was sent and developed, and 9 pages emerged. 8 pages are purported to be a briefing document to then President-elect Eisenhower, who won the presidency in 1952. It lays out a brief history of the UFO phenomena. Hundreds of pages, allegedly, from MJ12 have emerged since. I have some real issues with the reality or the viability of many of these documents. However, I should say, so many of them are so intriguing for the reason that if they're fake, they're not, something that was knocked out in somebody's basement on a period typewriter. They are remarkable in terms of mimicking or illustrating linguistic and writing quirks among people as well known as Robert Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein. For example, many of us, when we write, will have a habit of inverting a preposition, or substituting a semicolon for a colon, things like that, which leads me to feel ultimately over the years that if they're fake, they're intriguing in the level of care that was done to create them. But when all comes down to it, I have to concur with my late friend, mentor, and colleague Stanton Friedman, who really did extraordinary research into the subject and was able to locate 2 documents in the National Archives referring to a working group called MJ12, not surprisingly, not referring to what it was about. The 9th page that emerged in this original release was a letter from a very brief letter marked eyes only from President Truman to then new Secretary of Defense Forrestal, requesting that he move ahead in the matter discussed with all possible speed. It would have made sense, of course, for such a working group to exist. And like many of my colleagues, once the information had come out, I made it my business to start to research the lives of these various men. Again, this goes back to '87. We're in pretty much pre-digital times. I have notebook after notebook of cut and paste, of excerpts from out-of-print memoirs. Would these men have likely have been the ones that Truman would have chosen? Were they qualified for their jobs? Were there connections between them in real life? And in all cases, the answer is yes. And Forrestal was certainly among them.
Yeah. The possible smoking gun and all this, as far as evidence goes, was his diary. Was that ever recovered?
Yes and no. Unlike most of us who have kept diaries, the image that comes to mind is a little book with a lock on it, like a high school girl might keep for her secrets. Mr. Forrestal's marriage was bust from the start. His wife, Josephine Ogden, was a very beautiful woman. She was an editor at Vogue magazine, a former Ziegfeld Follies showgirl. It was a very, big society marriage, but he did not, I'm sorry, I just completely got distracted. There's no way I can, I know what I can do to get rid of that sound. Hold on. Okay.
Yep.
He married a woman named Josephine Ogden. And is that a good place to start?
Yeah.
Okay, once again. James Forrestal married a woman named Josephine Ogden, who came from a distinguished old Southern family that was now financially kind of with its back to the wall, but she had the right pedigree he was looking for. She was a beautiful woman, an editor at Vogue magazine, a former Ziegfeld Follies showgirl, and the marriage was kind of hollow from the start because he began seeing other women almost immediately. She had her own lovers after that, and he had very little to go home to at night. But he wanted a record of his public life. And so after work, and he would often work till about 8 or so at night, and then stay at the Pentagon till midnight, a naval secretary would come in and he would dictate to him everyone he had met during the day, the subject of their conversations, his observations about the people that he was dealing with. And so it went. In January of 1949, 2 months before he was due to step down as the Secretary for Defense, he contacted the White House. And kind of an unusual request, he asked the White House to take possession of his quote-unquote diary. At this time in American history, high-level bureaucrats would often take all of their paperwork with them. Forrestal refused to do this, and his reason was there were too many secret and top secret papers in this archive. The diary was said to have filled a standard filing cabinet, and that was confirmed by the investigative reporters at the New York Times who did the actual work on this back then. I calculated that a foot, counting across the tops of sheets of paper, and depending on whether it was onion skin or, the kind of paper that we use today, would be about 2,000 pages. So we had some tens of thousands of pages that constituted this diary. In 1951, obviously several years following his death, an American publisher, and I think I have it here, got permission to publish, so to say, the Forrestal diary.
Okay.
It was a national bestseller. It's a substantial book. It runs almost 600 pages, and it is excerpts from this actual diary. Interestingly, on the liner notes on the back of the book, the publisher discusses the fact that they were able to gain access to the 2,800 pages of his diary. Obviously, that's what they were given, and that's what they assumed was the number of pages. So it was already highly redacted. Obviously, there were things that were none of their business and that none of us should have been privy to. They were legitimately secret and top secret. However, what was presented as the diary to the American public was very much a deception. And almost needless to say, there was not even the hint of a reference to anything regarding the UFO phenomena. By the way, it's never gone back into print, but one can chase it down and use bookstores and on sites that deal with how to print books. And it makes very interesting reading. You get a very real picture of this man's incredibly sharp and observant mind as you read his accounts.
Last question on James Forrestal. Given the sensitive nature of his death and the mysterious nature of it, have you had or do you get much pushback on your research?
No. And I would say the same thing for my many years in UFO studies. Occasionally, we are made aware, usually by the individual themselves, that the government is watching them and tapping their phones and doing things to frighten them off. There was a period in the late 1980s where I was concerned about such things happening to me. I did have my telephone checked out professionally. I did learn that there was monitoring of the phone irregularly, and that was quite unnerving to me.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has ever come forward to try to quiet me about this, in part because I'm one guy. I've written quite a number of papers on Forrestal. I've published articles. I've spoken about him at different conferences around the country. I think the popular wisdom among those who move the chess pieces around is people like me are best left alone, because if something unforetold were to happen to me, that, even if it was completely explainable in conventional terms, there would certainly be a wider sphere of interest on possible dark doings. But ultimately, when you think about it, with the exception of maybe a widely publicized radio interview with a big audience, or doing a piece in a documentary that will go on television and also reach a substantial audience, how many people do we really reach? What damage do we really do?
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, leading into another topic, people like me are useful, in a funny way, in helping lay the ground for what is happening anyway, which is more and more general interest in the subject of classified matters, specifically in this case, the UFO phenomena, and reasons for keeping the lid on it for so many decades now. So I guess in a funny way, we play a part in a process that can no longer be stopped.
Right. It'd be a fascinating subject to talk about on its own, mysterious deaths over the years. But so bottom line is, James Forrestal, perhaps he just knew too much.
He did know too much. And had he not taken it so much to heart and personalized it, and come undone around his personal sense that he had failed the President of the United States, and by extension, history. And the concerns based on a much more naive understanding, perhaps, of the phenomena of breakdowns. He had to die. He had to die. And that, for me, is one of the great American tragedies, and something that I am dedicated to trying to bring to public attention here and abroad.